So finally, I'm getting near the end. You'll be relieved to know. So I just want to wrap up with a few philosophical things for you to think about. And then we'll call it a day. So, the flow of time, I talked about Newton's definition of time. But there are definitely some issues. We've already talked about a few of them. The favorite metaphor, time flows like a river. This is certainly not too far off from what Newton said. I mean, I think when I had the arrow moving along the meter stick, I mean, that's something very, akin to this idea of a river flowing by. So you can either say that you're on the river in a canoe and you're witnessing different moments along the shore, or perhaps simpler still, you're just standing on the shore watching the river go by, and the point of the river in front of you corresponds to different points of time. Well, it's fine as a metaphor, and it's fine for writers and poets, but there's really some problems with this. For one thing, a river flows at a rate that you can actually measure. So you can take your bucket, you can go down to the river and measure the rate of that flow in, say, gallons per second or liters per second or something like that. Well, at what rate does time flow? And, before you put up your hand and say, well, I know that, time flows at the rate of 1 second per second. Well, not really. I mean, the seconds just cancel, and so you're left with, time flows at a rate of 1. So it's, and also, the water is flowing with respect to the bank or the shore. So what would time be flowing with respect to? That's also very difficult. So you could introduce a kind of hypertime that exists behind regular time, but then you'd want to know if hypertime flows, you need hypertime. So these things, which sound so nice as metaphors, I think can get us into trouble. But then you have to ask, if time doesn't flow, what's going on? And I talked to different people about this. Actually, one of my CBC radio documentaries from 2 years ago is called Living on Oxford Time. I don't know if anybody got it, but it actually sort of looked at this issue. I talked to David Deutsch and Julian Barber and Roger Penrose, and they all happened to be in Oxford, and they all had sort of wacky ideas about time. But one argument you could give, and Julian Barber, one of the guys I talked to in Oxford, likes to put it this way. Really, he's not a fan of time. He thinks it's something we've kind of invented by accident. And he sees not a series of connected moments, not a continuum of time at all. He sees a series of nows, of moments, with no flow whatsoever to connect them. Really just a static array. Actually, he doesn't like the word static either because the word static suggests that other things flow through time. But at any rate, it's some array or a heap or a mound of these individual moments. He calls it Platonia after Plato with his realm of ideal forms and all that. We had a nice long chat in his old farmhouse. You could maybe almost guess that he lives in a 350-year-old farmhouse. Anyway, and at the end, I asked him, what is time? And he says, time is a mistake the mind has made. I would say of time what Laplace said to Napoleon about God. I have no need of that hypothesis. So, I mean, is he crazy? Not totally. I should say maybe he's actually not on the faculty at Oxford, but he does have a PhD. He is a respected physicist. He's not actually employed by the university at Oxford. He just lives in the neighborhood. And, it's interesting. He denies the existence of time. He was still able to meet me at the train station at the appointed hour. So that's good. Somehow he is able to cope in a world in which the rest of us seem to imagine that time is there. Well, you can always say, all right, he's English and he's nuts or something, but the thing is, what he has said here is not so different from the mainstream position in both physics and philosophy. And here's just a quote from a regular run-of-the-mill Harvard philosopher in the 20th century who says almost the exact same thing. Time flows only in the sense in which a line flows or a landscape recedes into the west. That is, it is an ordered extension, and each of us proceeds through time only as a fence proceeds across a farm. Well, that clears that up, doesn't it? I don't know. And this is something like the mainstream position. So it's very hard for me to look at this and say, I don't like it, or I disagree with it, or it's wrong. I can't really say why I have a problem with it. But it does seem to... I have such a hard time meshing that with what I think I feel, what perhaps you think you feel, of this idea as time as a thing that evolves or passes by or something. When I spoke to David Deutsch, some of you may know the name, he's sort of a pioneer in quantum computing. He took a slightly different approach, because I argued with David Deutsch, well, so why do we feel? Because he took this sort of stance. And I said, well, then why do we feel that time is passing by? And he said, I don't think we do. And I said, what do you mean you don't think we do? He said, we just talk about it that way. We use our language as though we think that time passes by. Anyway, and then my head exploded. But and people are really, I think, struggling with this. Now, there is an alternative, which is that we've left something out or made some sort of a mistake along the way. And one of the thinkers, actually right here in Southern Ontario, Lee Smolin, he's at the Perimeter Institute and also lives in Toronto, who's thought about this and vehemently disagrees with the view that I just presented and thinks that time is very real and needs to be defended. And in one of his books, Lee Smolin writes, we have to find a way to unfreeze time, to represent time without turning it into space, right, without doing analogies like this. Without turning it into space. He says, I have no idea how to do this. I can't conceive of a mathematics that doesn't represent a world frozen in eternity. So, as far as Smolin is concerned, although the scientific revolution began with this sort of breakthrough of, with Galileo measuring distances and times and objects in motion, it also led to a conceptual problem in Smolin's view. Because we've now turned time into a dimension that's somehow analogous to space. And yes, it allowed us to do a lot of things, but it also, allegedly, if you believe Smolin, has sort of led us astray. So, that's about it. My conclusion really is just that time seems so fundamental to us, I think. It seems so simple, which is why some people said, how can you write a whole book about that? But at the same time, there's really a lot that we don't know, so somebody in some department at some university somewhere still has some explaining to do. Thank you very much.